Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 203.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, I did mention that I was going to come back with another bite-sized episode from Dr. Wendy Suzuki. And indeed, I have listened to that again and refreshed that in my mind today. But another episode caught my attention. And I had a quick listen to it before I had that refresher listen to Dr. Wendy Suzuki, who I'm now a big fan of. And that was another bite-sized episode from Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast, Feel Better, Live More. And you're going to laugh as soon as I tell you what the title is. And you're going to understand why I wanted to put this one in first. It's a bite-sized episode, The Most Critical Factor for Overall Health and Longevity with Dr. Peter Attia. Can you guess what they're going to be talking about?
Diet?
Anything else that might make you laugh because I've been banging on about it for the last 2 episodes?
Exercise.
Yes. As soon as I saw that title, I thought, I bet that's what they're going to be talking about. But they might be coming at it from a slightly different direction. And as we talked about in our 200th episode, some of us, pointing at myself, need to keep hearing this in a slightly different way until it sinks in. And the full episode, which I haven't listened to yet, but I am going to probably today or tomorrow, is called The Science of Longevity, Why Healthspan Matters More Than Lifespan with Dr. Peter Attia. And many people out there listening to this will probably know Peter Attia already, but Dr. Peter Attia is a medical doctor, a longevity expert, and author of the brand new book, Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity. Probably also worth a listen. He gained his medical degree at Stanford University, trained in general surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and was a surgical oncology fellow at the US National Cancer Institute. He is also on the editorial board for the journal Aging and host of the Drive podcast, which covers health, medicine, and longevity. And that's thanks to the details on Rangan's episode information. So this is a bite size, so it's part of a bigger conversation they had. And judging from the episode, I bet there's an awful lot more interesting information in the full-length episode. So I might tell you about that another time. But he maintains that exercise, yes, exercise, we are repeating ourselves, or I'm repeating myself, exercise is the most potent longevity intervention that exists. But Rangan says, well, why? Can you tell us a bit more about that? And Peter Attia says, it's not a matter of opinion, but of data. So I thought this was quite good. We've talked about studies and percentages and things from other people before, but he digs into it in a slightly different way. So I thought, keep coming at it, keep chipping away from slightly different directions. And he talks about hazard ratios. And first of all, he explains what hazard ratio is. So for those of you who aren't too familiar, it's something I'd heard of, but I didn't know exactly what it was. But a hazard ratio is a number that communicates the relative risk of one condition relative to another. So an example that we all know about, and you've mentioned these statistics before, the hazard ratio associated with all-cause mortality for a smoker versus a non-smoker is 1.4. What that means statistically is that you are 40% more likely to die if you're a smoker than a non-smoker, all other things being equal. So that's where it gets a bit tricky. That's where it gets awfully tricky with these headlines that we see splashed across claiming that such and such, eating red meat will give you a heart attack or whatever it is. Very rarely do they have this, where they've ruled out everything else and they're comparing things properly, for one thing. There are other problems, but that's one of the problems. And a hazard ratio of 1 means there's no difference at all. So hazard ratios associated with all-cause mortality, a few more examples. Hypertension, 1.2. So what does that mean? That means you're 20% more likely if you have hypertension than if you don't, 20% more likely to die in any given year if everything else is equal. Coronary artery disease is 1.3. Type 2 diabetes, also 1.3. End-stage renal disease is 1.75 to 2.75. So massive. That's a 75 to 175% increase. And then he goes on to say that when you do the same analysis based on cardio fitness, strength and muscle mass, the numbers are even bigger, obviously in a beneficial way, by a lot. He says comparing the VO2 max, and that is the maximum oxygen uptake. This is a test of peak aerobic capacity. Interestingly enough, actually, my father just had this test done. And my stepmother. He managed to drag my stepmother along as well. And they had this test the other day. So I need to dig into that a bit. I'm not sure if you have to go and have it tested somewhere, whether there are any DIY alternatives. I shall be on Google after this to find out. So comparing this VO2 max of someone in the bottom 25% of the population for their age and sex to the top 2%, the hazard ratio is 5. So that's a 400% difference, all-cause mortality. So that's huge. And just moving, not necessarily going from one extreme to another. So say you're in the 50th and you want to move to the 75th percentile. The hazard ratio difference is 2.75. So that's more significant than having end-stage renal disease. And he says he could go into, and maybe he does somewhere else, the same kind of analysis for muscle mass and strength. And so they go on to talking about his concept of the 4 horsemen. He was saying when it comes to thinking about lifespan and extending it, you need to really get to grips with and understand what the biggest impediments are. And that's where his 4 horsemen come in. And this is assuming you're a non-smoker. Number 1, diseases of atherosclerosis, cardiovascular, things like that. Number 2, cancer. Number 3, neurodegenerative diseases and related dementias. And number 4, he said this isn't direct cause. This is not something you're very likely to see on being cited on the death certificate. And this is the spectrum of metabolic diseases. So things like type 2 diabetes, non-fatty liver disease, these kind of things. Most of the people listening know about this already, but all sorts of problems associated with metabolic disease, insulin resistance. So again, he says you're unlikely to see them specified on the death certificates, and they're not direct cause, but what they do is they amplify the other 3 horsemen twofold.
I find it interesting, Daisy, that 2 weeks in a row we've talked about horsemen in totally different topics.
Yes, exactly. I thought that.
It's kind of like pillars and horsemen are the 2 ways to categorize things. But yeah, these are really powerful.
Yeah, that's very true. Handy if you've got 4. And handy if it's talking about something bad, of course, because we all know as soon as somebody says horsemen, you 4 horsemen, you know, you've got that image, haven't you, straight away. He does talk about the limitations of what we can do. He says you can't avoid these horsemen completely. We can't, unless he says we're in the realms of science fiction, we can't eliminate them. But what we can do is delay their onset. And that's what's important. He says there's proof of this. It exists already in long-lived people. So, the centenarians, people who are getting to 100 or more years old. Lots of studies have been done on these people around the world. And what is revealed in these studies is not that they live longer with the 4 horsemen, but they live longer without them. They delay their onset. Mm-hmm. Once they have them, apparently, the time it takes to kill them is about the same. But what's different about them is that they delay them knocking on the door. Then Rangan goes on, and this was probably towards the end of the podcast, the long podcast, because this is usually when he comes up asking for his tips at the end. But he says, have you got any generic health recommendations? So, not needing to know anything about the individual, but what's going to apply to everybody? And he says, okay, 3. 1, exercise. 2, adequate sleep. 3, adequate protein consumption. He says, those are the things that are going to stave off those horsemen for longer than you might do otherwise. But he makes a little caveat there. Adequate means different things for different people. So he uses himself as an example. And he says what he needs to do exercise-wise to get what he calls the training benefit will be a lot more than somebody, for example, who is in that bottom 25%, in that 25th percentile. And what you need to do, so if you're in that bottom 25%, he says 3 hours will get a huge benefit, and that will get a larger benefit incrementally than he would by increasing his training by that same amount of time.
3 hours per week?
Yes. Yeah, don't worry, it's not every day.
Oh no. Oh no.
But for him, it probably would be closer to that. And strength, muscle mass, and cardiorespiratory fitness. And he cites that last one as being the most important. I think this is where the old VO2 max comes in. He says there are no upper bounds in terms of benefit, but there is an upper bound for risk. So again, it needs to be individual, but he uses an example of a patient of his who was determined to get 20,000 steps in a day, but ended up developing an injury. So in pursuit of something beneficial, it ended up with risk. It created an injury. So you do need to be individual and smart about it. And he talks about the cumulative benefits. So the earlier you start, the better. Rangan was talking about just a general example of someone who gets to their 40s and really starts suddenly thinking about it. And, I don't want to end up like my father or my grandfather. And Peter Attia says, well, this is this great opportunity. At this age, you've got hopefully 3-4 decades to get those cumulative benefits and compound the benefits. So as always, the earlier you start, the better. But he says there's value in change at any age, but the earlier you start, the more you can move that needle. But again, another but, the most important thing is to choose something that you can do consistently. He says it's better to do less consistently than a lot inconsistently. He says he'd rather someone was doing 7 out of 10 of his recommendations all the time, every day, whatever, than 10 out of 10, but inconsistently. It's a bit like yo-yo dieting. You actually, you end up just pretty much wasting your time, sometimes actually doing more damage than good.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a kind of common reference for me, and I think it's really important for people because sometimes our desire for perfection prevents us from doing what would be helpful. Or on the other end of it, we think, well, as long as I do it sometimes, it's got to be good enough. And I remember my advisor saying to me as I was struggling to finish grad school, Terry, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. And one that we always say at the fasting method, when people are trying to decide, well, what fast should I do next and things, the best fast is the fast that you'll do. So finding, like you said, finding some form of physical movement and exercise that you will do consistently, not fits and spurts where you do a whole bunch and then don't do any. Whatever it is that you will do, better than nothing. I remember I had this conversation with a client when I was a psychologist, and she said, well, I can only get in 20 minutes of walking. I was probably not the greatest example at that time, but I said, listen, 20 minutes of walking is so much better than 20 minutes on the couch for your health and your longevity. Who cares if you can't do 30 or 50 or a faster pace right now? Do the 20. It's really kind of comparing having it or not having it, doing it or not doing it. The best exercise is the exercise you will do consistently.
Exactly. And also, he says, is to assess what type you need to do. And he refers back also to, remember, those 3 generic health recommendations. It wasn't just exercise, it was adequate sleep and adequate protein consumption. He says if your VO2 max, talking about aerobic fitness, I think, basically, that's certainly the way I understood it and makes it easier for me to understand. If that is in the 25th percentile, then that's what you should focus on. It says here, you have a big opportunity. And remember, he cited this as being probably the most important, actually. So this is a big opportunity to improve your aerobic efficiency, both base and peak. Getting technical here, going to have to Google this, find out a bit more. If muscle mass and strength is low, focus on that and just maintain your aerobic fitness. I mean, obviously, I suppose if everything is low, you need to do it a little bit on everything, or maybe decide which one you start with or whatever. If your sleep is suffering, that's what you need to focus on. And we all know about that. If you're getting really poor sleep, not that it doesn't matter at all what else you do, but everything is going to be pulled back. A bit like you're going to be dragging a huge weight around with you trying to do any of the other things. So if sleep is a real problem, put all your energy into trying to improve that a bit, getting, moving this needle, moving this percentile, getting yourself into a different percentile. And I thought this was quite a good way of putting it, if you're overnourished and under-muscled, thought, yeah, I like this description. That probably applies to me. Focus on upping protein, reducing caloric intake, and strength training. So again, this is moving away. He's talking about the generic things, but then he's talking about, tailoring it to yourself. What do you need to focus on, and what level? Where are you at? And, the good news is the worse your starting point, the biggest impact you're going to get from just improving it a bit. Or at least that's kind of what I heard him saying, because I thought that gave me the impetus to sort of think, okay, well, what small things I can do? And talking back to Rangan, he might have mentioned it in the longer episode. But if you think back to it, was either the last one I did or the one before, when he talked about his 5-minute kitchen workout. And that's mostly their sort of strength and body weight exercises and calf stretches and things like that. I've actually written it out and it's up on my fridge. So it doesn't have to be a lot, but you could see some big improvements. But the interesting thing, the thing that I want to dig into is actually finding out, trying to get some baseline measurements on the different things he talks about as best I can, DIY at home. And then, having something that you can check back in. I think there's something you can do with testing your aerobic fitness, with doing something physical and checking your pulse. I think there's something along those lines you can do at home. So I'm going to be looking into that and getting a baseline, and then starting to do some things and, checking in once a month or something and see if I can see improvements on these things that really matter. We talk often, don't we? And people that we know and people we work with often talk about, not that the scales are completely redundant, but they shouldn't have the importance that so many people put on it. And I've got a friend who wants to lose weight, and the only thing she's focusing on really is weight. It's like, I'd love to see that as one data point you get, but there would be so many other things that you could take a baseline measurement and see how those things improve, So these are some more things for my list of metrics that I need to be looking at and following, working out what's most important.
Yeah, and that also reminds me that so often there is still this kind of misinformation, I can't think of the right word, that still gets promoted, or a lot of us still carry in our head, is that the reason I should exercise is if I want to lose weight. And if I want to lose weight, I should just exercise more. And, you've done at least 3 episodes now on the importance of movement and exercise. And not once did you focus on for weight loss. This idea that it's so much more about actual, metabolic health, cardiovascular health, bone density, brain health, brain growth, and, nourishing our brain, stress relief. Like, there are so many benefits to exercising. And I would actually put weight loss as one of the very least benefits. But for so many people, that's when they exercise, or that's when they believe that they should exercise and that it should do the trick. And then they do a bunch of exercise and they don't.
I was going to say, you get into these fits and starts, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Signing up to the gym on January the 1st and going at it for...
And if I don't lose weight, well, why should I be doing all this exercise?
Yeah.
And I continue to, and again, I can't say that I am the epitome of someone following this to the T, but I think mindset-wise, I understand it's not about that's how I'm going to lose weight or that's how I'm going to maintain my weight, but this is how I'm going to help my cardiovascular system. This is how I'm going to help my brain. This is how I'm going to add to my longevity. Not, this is going to burn more calories, so I'm going to lose more weight. I think we really need to get rid of that way of thinking about exercise, because it really holds us back.
It's a bit like the opposite of, makes me think of that 4th horseman, which wasn't the direct cause of death, metabolic diseases, insulin resistance. They're not the things that are going to be listed as causing your death, but the impact is massive. And it's because of that, quite often, that you end up with the things that end up killing you. So it's kind of the other way round.
Yeah.
With the exercise. It's not necessarily something, especially if your obesity is your problem and that's what you're wanting to address, it wouldn't necessarily be the thing that gets the direct impact tick, but it has a massive influence, actually. And this will be a debate that I'm sure different people will say, well, it does have a direct influence, direct versus indirect. But I think, you get my point, and it's along the lines of what you were saying, but it just has this overall massive effect on your health, your longevity, and your ability probably to do the other things that will maybe have a more direct impact.
The other thing I think is important, and, I understand the part that you shared, that different people will need different levels of movement and exercise. But the idea too, when we think about exercise in the old way we were taught about it, that if you're not at the gym for an hour and a half, ready to throw up and feel like you can't move and you can't move your legs the next day, then it's not worth it. 20 minutes of walking a day for someone in that lower 25 percentile could be life-changing, life-extending. It does not have to be a grueling 25-mile hike up a high elevation peak. It's just making this so much more realistic. And I feel like you kind of joke when you say I'm doing this topic again, and it's helping because you need this. I feel like, of course, this is maybe my guilty conscience. Is Daisy really trying to get me to exercise? Is she really pushing this? But I do leave this thinking, oh my gosh, Terry, this is a place where you could make such a difference. Just figure out a consistent movement or exercise routine that you could work on. Don't, kill yourself with going over the top, but find something that you can do consistently. And you too can have these benefits that Daisy keeps sharing with us.
And of course, he didn't talk, and maybe he does in a longer episode, but he didn't talk so much about mood. But of course, that's something that Dr. Wendy Suzuki focused more on the power of exercise for anxiety and depression and mood disorders. So throwing that into the mix. Because the other thing that I was thinking of, gosh, what we need to do an episode on what's holding you back. What's stopping you from doing this? Because, we're both intelligent people. The listeners out there are intelligent people. And I've been repeating the same message in a slightly different way to myself, to you, to other people out there. But, what is stopping us doing it? When you know it's the right thing to do, you've heard over and over again ways to make it easier for yourself. You've heard about all the benefits, but still, why? Okay, confession time. And I'm forgetting about these, what were the different categories of change you talked about in episode 200. And so I'm not sure which stage this is in. But I mentioned just then, I wrote down the exercises and put them on my fridge, Rangan's 5-minute kitchen workout. Have I done it yet? No.
You're still in either...
Maybe confessing here now will make me start doing it next week. But I feel like... what is that massive elastic band that's holding me back from stopping actually doing it? Because, I've come at it from almost every direction now. I've convinced myself, I know. So why am I not doing it yet? I mean, that's not to say I'm doing nothing. That's not true. I do things, but there's so much more that I could be doing, even if it's just starting with Rangan's 5-minute kitchen workout. So I feel like maybe that's something we need to talk about another time.
Yeah, sounds good.
What's holding you back?
And, you're really highlighting again what helps us get out of the contemplation stage and into the action stage.
Yeah.
Because we can buy a lot of fitness equipment, we can have new shoes, we can think about doing it, but something often is holding us back from taking the action, and not just taking the action once, because I'm pretty good at doing that, but taking the action consistently and making it, a pattern, a routine, a habit. That's the next piece.
There you go. Maybe we'll come back with something that will help address that another time.
Very good. So what are you going to do today, Daisy, for some movement?
I don't know. Well, I say that. You're at the beginning of the day. Yeah. I'm coming towards, certainly the middle of the day. I have already done 2 dog walks. So I have done some movement already.
Great.
And they're reasonable dog walks that involve some hills. So I've had a reasonable 2 dog walks already. So I feel like I have ticked a reasonable box for the day.
Yeah. And my answer would be probably one that really reflects the why we don't do it. Because instantly I started thinking about where in my day today could I do something? And, of course I'm not thinking, where could I do that 5-minute kitchen routine? But I'm thinking, when could I go for a hike? And we are going on a trip today. So we're going to be in the car for 3 hours. Then we're going to be visiting people. And so it was so easy for me almost to dismiss it right away and think, well, that just won't work in my day. Mm-hmm. And I think that's
5
an example.
minutes.
That's right. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Well, the challenge is set to make some changes, even if they are small.
The gauntlet has been thrown.
It has. I have a very tired Lila next to me who ticked multiple boxes yesterday, went over to my mum's in Worthing, and there were not only her 2 canine buddies that came with us, but another 2 and 2 children. So she spent pretty well all day just roaring around. It was a nice day, roaring round and round the garden, didn't stop at all. Usually spends large chunks of that day asleep. And so today I think she's making up for it because she's absolutely zonked out.
That's great. That's great. Makes her behavior easier too.
Yes, definitely. She's been nicely fast asleep while we've been recording and not barking at stuff.
Great.
Okay, so until next week, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody.